Take the 1-minute
We just lost some power a few minutes ago. Did you hear the fire truck go by?
Stay tuned to get 2 rolls of alien tape free. You would.
Rallying cry for bigotry and hate.
So now I'm subject to this new form of censorship, which is called targeted propaganda, anti-Semitism, racism. These are the most appalling, disgusting pejoratives, and they're applied to me to silence me.
And Kennedy was invited by Republicans to testify in front of the House Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Government. But right after Kennedy's opening remarks, House Democrats moved, though unsuccessfully, to remove him.
No to allowing a witness to degrade and dismiss others and violate the rules.
Republicans called it ironic.
Censor him literally in a hearing about censorship.
The cognitive dissonance of that is deafening. It's insane.
And the Republican chair of the committee says Kennedy's testimony
help us expose and stop what's going on. This alliance, big government pressuring private entities to censor Americans.
And that's as the former New York Post editor who broke the Hunter Biden laptop story also testified, alleging censorship.
It was because it was true, and it was a threat to the power centers in this country.
But not everyone found the hearing worthwhile. I asked Democratic Congressman Jerry Connolly, do you think today's hearing should be held at all?
No. If you videotape this hearing, it could be a Saturday Night Live skit, except it's not funny.
Reporting from the Capitol, Iris Howe, NTD News.
A heated discussion on Capitol Hill. Several Biden administration officials face tough questions from lawmakers over their strategy on communist China. NTD's Sam Wong brings us the latest.
The House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party held a hearing Thursday, addressing the Biden administration's current approach in dealing with the CCP. Committee Chairman Mike Gallagher, a Republican, started off by praising several of the administration's policy measures in dealing with China.
Secretary of State Blinken reiterated the determination that the CCP was committing genocide in Xinjiang. The administration levied historic export controls on advanced U.S. semiconductors and equipment going to the PRC. The administration then succeeded in aligning its policy with critical allies.
The hearing comes on the heels of a visit to China by several top U.S. officials, aiming to put a stalled relationship back into motion. In a change of tone, Gallagher said that such a diplomatic approach has put Washington in a compromising position.
And instead of holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable, the administration chased CCP diplomats around the world, seeking meetings in Beijing as if they, not the CCP, had something to apologize for.
Representative Blaine Luetkemeyer said that China is running on a surplus in its trade with the U.S., and that extra pile of cash in China's pocket could be used to subsidize the regime's military capacity and its human rights abuses. Here's this exchange with Thea Rosman-Kendler, Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Export Administration.
We're funding, by $382 billion of a deficit, their activities. Would you not agree with that?
We are aggressively contending with the strategic trade threat posed by China.
No, you're not. I'm tired of your flowery language this morning. Please answer the question.
Washington recently stepped up restrictions on imports from China's Xinjiang region, using a law targeting forced labor in China. 2 more companies have been added to the U.S. blacklist as a result.
Despite all the heated moments, Chairman Gallagher said that both Republicans and Democrats are fighting for the same cause. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Sam Wong, NTD News.
A massive preliminary injunction, and perhaps even more significantly, in issuing that injunction, he justified it by noting that the plaintiffs in the case, which includes state attorneys general representing Missouri and Louisiana, as well as a number of prominent doctors, including signatories to the Great Barrington Declaration, as well as conservative activists and media outlets as well, essentially that they were likely to prevail on the merits that their First Amendment rights had been violated by the federal government directly and by proxy. And to the extent that holds, ultimately in court, this would be a huge boon to shutting down government-led speech policing efforts via social media companies.
So, Ben, what is the basis, or is there any basis of the federal government's argument for inducing social media companies to essentially censor information, however, under the pretext of combating misinformation, disinformation, and so forth? And how does this directly relate to the First Amendment, in your view?
So let me start with the latter portion of this. First Amendment protected speech includes specifically, obviously, core political speech, as the Supreme Court has deemed it, and essentially permits Americans to proceed unabridged and uninterfered with by government authorities in conversing on a whole array of subjects and putting forth viewpoints, including, if they want to, false viewpoints, although in many cases, particularly when we look at quote-unquote malinformation, what the government is referring to there is actually factual information that leads people to take a perspective that government authorities disfavor. And so clearly Americans' speech on the origins of the coronavirus or lockdowns or the efficacy of vaccines or whether the Hunter Biden laptop story is Russian disinformation or real, obviously it did prove real, or questions about mail-in balloting and the mechanics and rules and regulations around elections are obviously areas of speech that are fully protected, not even remotely close to crying fire in a theater and such. Set aside that issue for a moment. What federal authorities say is actually such speech threatens our national security. It can inspire people to violence if they don't believe that there is integrity in our elections. And of course, authorities will point to January 6th to try to substantiate that claim. They will say that if you hold the wrong views or espouse the wrong views and articulate them on social media with respect to, say, vaccine efficacy, that you could lead people not to get the shots, and therefore that this could lead to a massive public health crisis. And you can see how this sort of predicate, this sort of justification, is the road to tyranny ultimately, because the government can say that virtually anything can lead Americans to make wrongful or harmful decisions or inspire actions that somehow can be linked to detrimental outcomes for the national interest, and then use that as a predicate to justify the censorship of virtually anything. So public health and national security or public safety have been used broadly as the pretext to justify government speech policing efforts directly and by proxy. But I don't personally think that that holds water in any respect. I do think it is the road to tyranny. And clearly Judge Doty agreed in putting forth this memorandum in conjunction with the injunction, detailing the fact that the plaintiffs were very likely to prevail on the merits in the wide variety of claims that they put forth regarding government First Amendment violations.
Ben Weingarten, really appreciate you joining us.
Despite lyrics that very often advocate for rape, robbery, and murder. What it looks like is ironically happening is the media establishment is trying to lynch Jason Aldean. They're trying to assassinate his character. They're trying to destroy his career. And it looks like they're doing this not because they seem to have an issue with, violence and song lyrics. They don't have an issue anywhere else. But instead because they disagree with his political views. It looks like they want to make him an example. They're trying to paint him with controversy, to shame him, degrade him, and by doing so send a message to the rest of the country music scene, which they hold an equal hatred against. This could happen to them as well if they don't toe the political line. That's the message they're trying to send. In fact, the Washington Post in particular has been at this for some time. In 2021, they framed Jason Aldean as having right-wing views and then painted this as a problem in the, quote, DNA of country music. The media establishment has actually done similar hit pieces on him specifically over the years for things like opposing vaccine lockdowns. He was attacked last year after his wife threw clothes from fashion firm Balenciaga in the trash after the company was criticized for sexualizing children in its advertisements because it had kids holding teddy bears with BDSM gear. Now, more recently, he was criticized by the Washington Post for failing to, quote, keep his politics private. He was accused of the thought crime of showing his toddlers wearing anti-Joe Biden t-shirts as they framed it. But look, politics aside and narratives aside, what we're watching is a reading of the public. We're seeing a difference in impact and a sign of what the public actually cares about. How is it that the corporate media, the entertainment industry, most of the so-called voices of influence, they call themselves at least, they can stand behind woke companies and the companies can still face a
There we
financial
go again.
crisis if the customers abandon them. But at the same time, if those institutions of influence can try to paint a public figure with ridicule and public support sends that person to the top of the charts, what does that mean? This is bigger than just Aldine and bigger than just a country music song. What this shows is that the powers of the establishment are fading. The screeching of the voices of influence do not actually have the influence they claim. They're trying to destroy them and they're failing at it. The media establishment does not represent public opinion. Businesses have little control over what people actually want. It's because it's becoming a lot more clear that the noise of the media machine is just that. It's noise. It does not represent what people actually want or what they believe. Stay tuned after the break. We speak with Dr. Gad Saad about the epidemic of unhappiness in this country and what we can do about it.
Swifties, the nickname for Taylor Swift fans. That's why they played this presentation during a July 18th city meeting, a proclamation for the 33-year-old Swift ahead of her Eras Tour visit.
Let it roll. It's me. Hi, Mayor Gilmore. It's me. I'm enchanted to share news that will make your wildest dreams come alive.
Gilmore and Councilmember Kathy Watanabe says Swift is a cultural icon for the community.
Funnily enough, I was listening to Karma on the way over here, and I think that's a really good song. And then I love Hey, It's Me, you know. There are just so many songs. You really can't pick one.
When Swift's Era Tour was announced, the mayor said the public contacted the city to do something to recognize the fans and artists. Along with the city name change, Swift herself gets the title of honorary mayor.
We have a serious business here in running the city, and I'm a serious mayor, but I thought this is an opportunity to bring some fun to our community, to change our name. We've never done that before.
Swift is set to perform at the Levi's Stadium on July 28th to 29th. So how did they come up with Swiftie Clara?
I will not take full credit. There was a lot of people at the city that worked on it. But first, part of the city's name starts with an S, and we really wanted to be a part of the Swift spirit and the Aries tour that is sort of sweeping the nation.
Let's create a love story that echoes through the ages. Swiftie Clara, you're our evermore.
Mayor Gilmore told me that her daughter thought the video was interesting, but her friends loved it even more so. Now, with this concert, it's expected to bring in lots of revenue and boost the economy of the city when Taylor Swift comes into town. Reporting in soon-to-be Swiftie Clara, California, David Lamb, NTD News.
All right, and next, San Francisco is seeing a highlight was in 1962 when Bennett performed at Carnegie Hall and released his signature song, I Left My Heart in San Francisco. Later in his career, Bennett collaborated with a number of younger stars, including Lady Gaga. Bennett was also known for serving in the military and helping liberate a German concentration camp, as well as for his work with the civil rights movement. Bennett was 96 years old. And Taylor swept the city's economy. NTD Business's Don Ma speaks with a risk consultant about if remote work is here to stay.
And now joining me is Derek Georgino, risk consultant in the greater LA area and NTD contributor. So Derek, it seems like more and more people are now talking about San Francisco's empty office spaces and fleeing businesses. Office workers going remote, it actually reduced the city's tax revenue by almost $500 million. That's according to a study. Maybe start us off with some context. What is happening here?
Yeah, well, last week, Salesforce's CEO, Mark Benioff, vocalized his concern about the state of metropolitan San Francisco. This man has a very close thumb on the pulse of what is happening in that city. And what he said, and I quote, is that the city is never going back to the way it was. To your point, an increasing remote workforce is a huge driver of it. Obviously, the pandemic transformed our nation's workforce into a more remote one. And it's resulted in dwindling business hour crowds in a lot of metropolitan areas throughout the United States, but particularly in San Francisco. And I've even seen it myself. serving various clients throughout Los Angeles. I've seen many restaurants and family businesses close in metropolitan areas that I serve because of this increasingly remote workforce.
Salesforce CEO saying that it'll never go back to normal. What does that mean, normal, to you?
I would say pre-pandemic foot traffic, pre-pandemic business activity. Big brands, huge brands continue to leave downtown San Francisco. San Francisco is undergoing what Axios and many others are referring to as a retail exodus, Don. And you know, bear with me here. There's a little bit of a list that I want to read out, and it's by no means inclusive of all the brands leaving the city, but it's significant. November 2020, during the pandemic, H&M closed its flagship store in downtown San Francisco. March 2021, Uniqlo, multi-billion-dollar clothing retailer, closes its Union Square store. May 2023, Nordstrom, multi-billion-dollar department store chain that many of your viewers are probably familiar with, cited rising crime in the city, closed its San Francisco stores. In January of this year, Meta, which needs no introduction, announced that it's drastically reducing its San Francisco office space. The list goes on and on. Whole Foods, Amazon Fresh, and this retail exodus is doing a lot of damage to the local economy there.
All right, so one final question, and this has to do with economic impact with the exodus that we're seeing in San Francisco. I would imagine this would have an impact on GDP overall. I mean, if businesses are leaving, San Francisco is probably getting less tax revenue, and that directly impacts economic growth. I mean, what are some of the economic impacts that you can see?
Well, it's also even simpler than that, Don. Like, the population of San Francisco is decreasing in terms of people who just live there. And in the Bay Area, the population of San Francisco, I think, decreased by over 7% from 2020 to 2022. And when retailers leave and they vacate all this office space, it's incredibly damaging to the real estate economy of San Francisco. But when CEOs start to chirp like that, sometimes they vote with their feet and they take off. I would be very concerned if I was San Francisco.
Well, all right. Thank you so much today, Derek. Always great to hear your insight.
Thanks for having me.
Full-scale invasion of Taiwan at acceptable cost to them. And I think, no foreign leader, I think, has paid more careful attention to Putin's experience in Ukraine than President Xi has as he thinks about Taiwan.
Burns was speaking at a security forum in Colorado. According to the CIA chief, Washington has learned from intelligence that Xi Jinping ordered his troops to prepare for an invasion of Taiwan by 2027. Burns said Putin's experience gives pauses to Chinese leadership. He called Ukraine an example of a smaller military successfully counteracting. The battles also exposed flaws in Russia's weapon systems. Burns stressed the West's unanimous support for Ukraine despite some economic losses from sanctioning Russia. China-based hackers breached the email account of the U.S. ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns. The Wall Street Journal first reported the breach, citing 3 anonymous U.S. officials. The sources say it's part of a targeted intelligence gathering campaign by Beijing. The sources also say hackers accessed the email account of Daniel Crittenbrink. He's the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and recently traveled to China with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. It's believed that hundreds of thousands of government emails were compromised in the breach. Many U.S. officials have labeled the Chinese Communist Party as the most advanced U.S. adversary in cyberspace. The FBI says China has a larger hacking program than all other countries combined. Yesterday, the world observed the 24th anniversary of the ongoing persecution of Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. People from different corners of the globe, including a large gathering in Washington, D.C., came together to demand an end to this persecution. Around 1,500 Falun Gong practitioners held candles to commemorate those who died as a result of the Chinese regime's persecution. NTD's Iris Tao was there to find out more.
On Thursday night, hundreds of candle flames dotted the National Mall in front of the Capitol. Thousands of Falun Gong practitioners participated in a candlelight visual in memory of those killed by the Chinese Communist Party for their faith.
It's important to remember the many who have died and lost their lives because of this persecution, which is unreasonable and unbelievable, really, and to call for the end, to raise awareness, here in the Capitol, for Congress, for everyone to know this continues, in a country, and it's really unbelievable.
When the persecution started in 1999, on the night of July 20th, they arrested me and my two sisters and tied us in the concentration camp. My sister kept her faith in truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, so she kept being tortured, and now she can't even move. Now I'm in a free land, and I'm touched and hope that the Chinese people can know the truth about the persecution. My father's organs were harvested. It was a real case of organ harvesting. When we went to visit him at the funeral home, his body was still warm. And at that moment, 20 to 30 secret police forced us out of the funeral home. I hope the American government can help stop this persecution and dissolve the CCP.
Falun Gong practitioners are dedicated and they have conviction to uphold their beliefs. And that's a problem in a communist society where you want people to follow the party's word. So, from what I understand, many people in mainstream Chinese society had started practicing Falun Gong. People within the government, people within the military, and it was so popular in China that the party became very afraid of Falun Gong. And people are dedicated, right? People were getting up in the morning and practicing every day. So it was a commitment to something spiritual and something deep, and that's threatening for an illegitimate party.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Howe, NTD News.
And if you have any news tips...
Power. Some dreaded the new deadly power unleashed on an unsuspecting world. Others saw an opportunity to end World War II.
There is the real possibility demonstrated by Hiroshima, demonstrated by the stopping of the Soviet Union, even slightly demonstrated by the initial attempts to make nuclear reactors.
The U.S. dropped the world's first atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, killing 140,000. A second bomb 3 days later killed another 70,000 in Nagasaki, effectively ending World War II. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
To the committees, and also CBP did not allow the chief to come and testify publicly before Congress on the border issue back in February. Now the chairman want a briefing from CBP as well as documents related to their decision to relocate the chief. And this comes at a time when the Department of Homeland Security is reporting a 65% drop in the number of illegal encounters since May. Critics argue that this is simply because the Biden administration's policies are changing the way they're processing what would be illegal immigrants. Here's how Congressman Chip Roy explains it.
We've had almost 500,000 people processed through the One app, so all we're doing is diverting how people are coming to Texas.
But DHS Secretary Mayorkas says that these newly created legal pathways deter cartel smuggling.
We use our discretionary authority under humanitarian parole. We have sought to disincentivize people from taking that dangerous journey.
And Democrats defend this, saying that policies like this are what's needed in the current geopolitical atmosphere.
The world is economically devastated. And the only game in town, meaning the only economy in the world today that is hitting on all 8 cylinders is the United States of America.
Gotta be a Democrat.
To their point of view that Secretary Mayorkas has lost operational control of the border. Some Republicans have filed articles of impeachment against Mayorkas to remove him from office. Others want to cancel his salary. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And how does the U.S. strategy in the Indo-Pacific shape global dynamics? And what role does China play in that region? Two Washington officials made some assessments today. NTD's Sam Wang brings us the details.
The Brookings Institution hosted 2 Biden administration officials discussing the strategic importance of the Indo-Pacific alliance.
We believe that much of the history of the 21st century will be written in the Indo-Pacific. America's future security and prosperity is inextricably linked to developments in this consequential region.
Dan Crittenbrink serves as the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. He noted that the U.S. is committed to strengthening partnerships in the Indo-Pacific to enforce rule-based international order. Clinton-Brink mentioned that China remains a challenge for regional security, and the best way to manage that hurdle is to bolster allies.
We have a regional strategy of which China is a part and not the other way around. Our allies and partners are intrinsically valuable to us. That's going to be the focus of our efforts across the region.
China has recently stepped up its aggression in the Indo-Pacific region. Back in May, a Chinese fighter jet made a dangerous maneuver towards a U.S. aircraft, cutting right in front of its nose. According to the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, that move forced the U.S. aircraft to fly through its wake turbulence. On the defense front, Eli Ratner, the Assistant Secretary of State for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs, said that Washington is working closely with Australia and the UK.
So a conventionally armed, nuclear-powered submarine for the Australians that we would be working on trilaterally with the UK as well. We completed a decision around the optimal pathway at the end of the 18-month consultation period.
As for Washington's next move in the Indo-Pacific, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has a trip to the region scheduled for next week. He'll be visiting Tonga, New Zealand, and Australia. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Sam Wong, NTD News.
Up next, Florida considering legal action against Anheuser-Busch. Governor Ron DeSantis says investments in Bud Light's parent company are hurting the state's pension fund. And a Southern California school district votes to require schools to notify parents if their child identifies as transgender. Both supporters and critics of the policy attended the heated meeting. These stories and more when we return.
Pension fund investments in Anheuser-Busch, the beverage company, took a huge hit in sales. That came after Bud Light worked with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney for promotional content. Months afterwards, Bud Light sales are still down over 20%. DeSantis now says the company violated legal responsibilities to its shareholders. Companies are supposed to aim for maximum profit. DeSantis alleges Anheuser-Busch put ideological motivations before profit. The governor sent a letter to the pension fund's interim director, writing, "We must prudently manage the funds of Florida's hardworking law enforcement officers, teachers, firefighters, and first responders in a manner that focuses on growing returns, not subsidizing an ideological agenda through woke virtue signaling." DeSantis told Fox News that the fund already took a hit due to the drop in Bud Light sales. Watch.
Well, we had over $50 million worth of InBev stock in the pension. Of course, Florida's pension fund's about $180 billion, so it's a pretty big endeavor. But it has absolutely hurt teachers. It has absolutely hurt other pensioners.
DeSantis is now considering taking legal actions against Anheuser-Busch. Meanwhile, political experts are speculating DeSantis is rebooting his campaign. That's because the governor keeps trailing far behind former President Trump in the polls. Reports came out this week saying his campaign let go a few staffers. According to NBC, voters might see the changes in the way he campaigns. For example, attending smaller events in order to save money and sitting down for interviews with a wider range of national media outlets. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
A school district in Southern California has decided to notify parents if their child is identifying as transgender. The heated board meeting lasted nearly 4 hours, and California's superintendent of public instruction was escorted out at one point.
The Chino Valley Unified School District voted to require schools to notify parents if their child identifies as transgender.
Mr. Na?
Aye.
And I'm a yes. The motion passes 4-1.
Under this new policy, the district schools let parents know if their child is identifying as a gender different from what is listed on their birth certificate. This applies to students who want to change their names and pronouns and access gender-based bathrooms, sports teams, and locker rooms. Supporters of the policy say parents have the right to know if their child is coming out.
I should be the one to consult my children. Nobody else has the right to say what I can or cannot teach my children. Just like I'm not pushing my family values on anybody, I don't want them to push it on my family.
But critics of the decision say it impacts gender identity and safety.
This policy
What a crock.
will out a student, putting them into a hostile household, which will further their mental degradation to the point where they will harm themselves.
Bullshit.
During the meeting, California Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman, also spoke in support of LGBT students.
That nearly half
of students who identify as being LGBTQ+ are considering suicide. I ask you to consider this, that the policy that you consider tonight not only may fall outside of the laws that respect privacy and safety for our students, but may put our students at risk because
What a
they may
crock
not
of
be in homes
bullshit.
where they can be safe.
After exceeding the 1-minute time limit, multiple security personnel escorted him away. But board president Sonia Shah argued that politicians shouldn't assume that non-affirming households would be a toxic environment for their kids.
Right now, they're saying non-affirming households are dangerous. Where do you get that? Actually, if you ask me, and I've listened to tons of parents, it's actually very safe to be a non-affirming, loving, caring household, because guess what? They're going to provide and pull their child in closer, the necessary needs that they need to be able to get better.
In the end, the board passed the policy in a 4-1 vote, with only board member Donald Bridge voting no.
And staying with schools, the White House recently announced a new Department of Education coordinator to take action against what they said is the growing threat that book bans pose for the civil rights of students. The statement also suggests that schools better put the books back on the shelves or lose federal funding. But parents and some lawmakers are pushing back. Darlene Sanchez is a reporter for the Epic Times, and she's been covering this topic. I spoke with her earlier today.
If you saw the images, you wouldn't want them.
Darlene, welcome. Educational materials in schools is in the spotlight. Parents you spoke to are concerned that they're being targeted by the federal government for restricting sexually explicit books from schools. What's their message?
Well, parents basically have been fighting, for I guess a good 2 years or so to try to remove sexually explicit materials that have been showing up inside of their school libraries and sometimes inside of classrooms. So this has been an ongoing battle for them. And what the concern is right now is that the Biden administration is basically found to what they see as a workaround. And, parents have been at the local level, at the grassroots level, trying to get school board people elected that are.
Quick thing here from the Biden administration, a little update on Sam Brinton. Non-binary ex-Biden official Sam Brinton was on a secret taxpayer-funded trip. At the time, Karen, he started stealing all that luggage to get women's clothing from a Las Vegas airport.
Because he's mentally healthy, right? Because mentally healthy people dress in women's clothes and steal those women's clothes off of baggage carousels.
I can't imagine that he is well.
Right.
To answer your question, yes, I think he was sick. Federal funds paid for by non-binary Britain,
Here we go again.
who uses they/them pronouns to head to the city of Las Vegas as a representative for the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy. He was on a trip. It was during this trip that Britain was caught on camera swiping a woman's suitcase, one of 3 incidents in which he was accused of doing this. Terrence, real quick, so it's interesting. The new angle is, we didn't know this guy on vacation.
I'm sorry. Please take down the video.
You can't even look at it. It's ridiculous. He looks like an evil cartoon character. Let's call it what it is. I mean, it looks ridiculous, like some
But when he
cartoon
stole the
villain.
women's dresses, we were paying for him to travel to Las Vegas for an official Biden trip.
Oh, I'm sure. Was Hunter there? Was there cocaine on the trip? I have so many questions.
So
See, we always have a good story, and then Karen says, was there cocaine there
What do
too?
you mean? It's still a good story. Why?
Was
Because
his
I
friend
threw in the
David
obvious.
there?
Right, where was Paul Pelosi?
But since it was technically funded by the Biden administration, does that make the Biden administration an accessory or a co-conspirator to the crime?
Interesting. We should
just put it out
because
there.
they're above the law. No, they're above the
Actually,
law.
Karen's got a quick answer.
The answer
There's 2 tiers of justice, Terrence. They ain't going to get in trouble. How about that?
This week, the CDC reported that nearly 110,000 Americans died from drug overdoses last year. And you know what it was fueled by? Our country's fentanyl crisis. Chinese chemical companies allegedly play in consciously flooding the U.S. with cheap and deadly fentanyl.
咱俩现在我打不过你，我也没你有钱，我给你家下毒，这叫分太医。
Washington recently stepped up restrictions on imports from China's Xinjiang region,
using a law targeting forced labor in China. 2 more companies have been added to the U.S. blacklist as a result. Despite all the heated moments, Chairman Gallagher said that both Republicans and Democrats are fighting for the same cause. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Sam Wong, NTD News.
And while lawmakers debate their approach to China, the regime has been courting prominent Americans outside of Washington. Today, veteran U.S. diplomat Henry Kissinger meeting with China's Xi Jinping. Here to discuss the significance of moves like this is Brandon Weichert, a geopolitical analyst, senior editor at 1945.com, and the author of Winning Space: How America Remains a Superpower. We spoke earlier today. Brandon, great to have you on the show. Kissinger, who's not representing the American government in an official capacity, received a much warmer welcome from Beijing than John Kerry this week. Beijing seems to be taking a kind of approach where they'll selectively engage with Americans who it perceives as friendly, such as Kissinger, such as Bill Gates, for example, whose company has a long history in China, rather than through official diplomatic channels. What do you think is behind these moves, and do you think that it's a deliberate strategy here?
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. It is absolutely a deliberate strategy, and if we were smart, we would not follow that strategy. Clearly, Beijing wants America to do a deal, but they want it to be on their terms, so we should not be meeting them at all midway through this. But unfortunately, Joe Biden is going to do a deal, and Taiwan is going to be left out in the cold. You can rest assured of that.
If we come back to Kissinger, he long championed the idea of inviting China to the international order, of fostering its growth so that it can become a responsible stakeholder. But now that China has become one of the biggest threats to the U.S., do you think that was the right approach to take?
I think the last 40 years of U.S. foreign policy toward China, since accepting Mao's invitation to open up to them, has been an unequivocal disaster, and it's going to lead us to a third world war, and it could very well lead to America's first military defeat in combat.
The China threat is increasingly recognized as a bipartisan issue within the U.S. now, and both parties are likely to try to appear even tougher on the regime as the general election approaches. How do you see that impacting the U.S.-China relations going forward?
Appearances are often deceiving, and I think that there's a lot of talk about standing tough and a lot of signals about being tough for the consumption of American voters. But I think China knows fundamentally they're going to get a deal with Biden on global warming in particular, which will have effects for the whole country, not just on global warming issues, but on trade, on economics, all of it. And in order to do that, they know they're going to be able to extract the
Biden is China's bitch.
Basically downplaying its commitments to Taiwan, and that's exactly what Beijing wants. And you have to elect a Republican, either Trump or DeSantis, who's hawkish on China and who won't, basically give in to China at the first push. And right now what we have happening is, Biden's putting on a big show of being Mr. Tough Guy, but it's just a show. Whereas with Trump, we actually have a history of his 4 years in office standing up to China on Taiwan. That was the first thing he did in the transition in 2016, standing up to China on trade with agriculture. He got an actual deal out of China that was beneficial to American farmers in the long run and hurt China, standing up to China on tech. So we have candidates out there running for office in 2024 who, if elected, will stand up to China and will force them to be that responsible actor that Kissinger assures us they will be, but they won't be unless we hold their feet to the fire.
Brandon Weichert, thank you so much for that.
What I take every night just to sleep. Yep. Count them. Just to be able to sleep for the night.